Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Andrew Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Andrew Griffiths.
Mr. Speaker, we must never accept the kind of mistreatment suffered by some of my constituents at Stafford Hospital. This week we've seen laid bare the extent of the culture of mistreatment in the NHS in Wales. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's time not only for a full independent inquiry into the NHS in Wales, but also an apology from the Leader of the Opposition for his party's record?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point, because in the NHS in Wales, doctors and nurses and hospital staff are working round the clock to deliver good care, but they have been let down by the Welsh politicians in Cardiff who have cut the NHS. And that is why it is the British Medical Association and Labour members of Parliament who've been calling for a public inquiry in Wales. Even before that, what we should have is the OECD want to carry out a comparative study looking at the English NHS and the Welsh NHS. I support them doing that. Does the right honourable gentleman?
Mr. Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, last week, 16 leading health organisations representing doctors, nurses and patients warned the Prime Minister that health and social care services in England are now, and I quote, at breaking point, and things cannot go on like this. Why is that happening?
Absolutely no answer to the question of whether there should be a proper inquiry into the Welsh NHS. I will tell him what is happening in the English NHS, for which this government is responsible. 1.3 million more outpatients being treated, 6.6 million more outpatient appointments, 2,500 more nurses, 8,000 more doctors, a record we can be proud of. Why? Because we invested in the NHS in England. They cut the NHS in Wales.
Mr. Speaker, everyone can see what the Prime Minister is doing here. After nearly 5 years in office, he can't defend his record on the NHS in England. Every time he mentions Wales, we know he's running scared on the NHS in England. Now, in England, we have the highest waiting list for 6 years, the longest waits in A&E for 10 years, the cancer treatment target missed for the first time ever, and millions of people can't get to see their GP. Won't he just admit this? The NHS in England is going backwards, isn't it?
Let's have an OECD inquiry. I support it. Does he?
Speaker, in case he hadn't realised.
At a very early stage, far too much noise, the public aren't impressed. Let's try to operate up to a certain standard. If the session has to be run on, the session will be run on. Doesn't bother me.
He obviously doesn't realise he's supposed to answer the questions. I asked the questions, the Prime Minister's questions. He couldn't, and the whole country will have noticed, he could not defend what is happening in the English National Health Service for which he is responsible. And why? Because 4 years ago, he told us his top-down reorganisation would improve the NHS. But now we know it's £3 billion down the drain. Will he now admit in public what he's saying in private? His top-down reorganisation has been a total disaster for the NHS.
I'm not only happy to defend our record in the NHS with the extra spending, the extra doctors, the extra nurses, all the extra treatments. I want a comparison between the Labour NHS in Wales being cut, no targets met on cancer since 2008, on A&E since 2008. I want a comparison. So I will allow the OECD to come in and look at the English Health Service. Let me ask him again, will he let it look at the failures in Wales?
It is extraordinary. No attempt even to answer the question, Mr. Speaker. Instead of of smearing the NHS in Wales, he should be saving the NHS in England, Mr. Speaker. Now, the question people are asking is what will the NHS look like in the future? His own Conservative chair of the Health Select Committee says that unless he changes course in his funding plan for their NHS, there will be charges. While he's promised nothing more than inflation for the NHS, we've shown how we can raise £2.5 billion a year over and above that. Why doesn't he admit all he offers on the NHS is 5 more years of crisis?
What we've seen is he is totally terrified of Labour's failures in Wales on the NHS. He will not answer the simplest of questions. Now, let me tell him what has been happening over the last 5 years in the English NHS. And let me tell him what the former Labour advisor, who worked with him in number 10 Downing Street, who now runs NHS England, let's hear what he has to say about the NHS in England. He says this: over the past 5 years, the NHS has been remarkably successful. We're treating millions more patients than 5 years ago. The NHS has become some £20 billion more efficient. A world-leading genomes programme is harnessing the best of this country's medical expertise, and the global rankings have just ranked us the highest performing health system of 11 industrialised nations. This guy was obviously a much more effective Labour advisor than either of those two. Now, he's trading unattributable quotes, and he quoted one. Let me quote him one. This shadow minister, who I think sums it up: we don't have a policy problem, we've got a massive Ed Miliband problem. And I think we see that in evidence today.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say, I don't think he's in any position to give a masterclass in leadership. Two MPs have defected, 9 of his 2010 MPs standing down, and every day he changes his policy on Europe. Now, he didn't answer the question. One of the ways he could support the NHS is by funding 1 week cancer testing with a levy on the tobacco companies. Why won't Linton Crosby let him do it?
What we're doing is treating 500,000 more cancer patients every year than under Labour. But let's see, what was it the Royal College of GPs said about his policy? They said this: a promise will only serve to create a false expectation that cannot be met. Like all his promises, unravelling in one go. Now, Mr. Speaker, he spoke about leadership. He only had one difficult leadership decision to make this week, and that was to sack his shadow chancellor, and he completely flunked it. And it tells you the two things you need to know about Labour. They do not have an economic plan, and they don't have the leadership that can ever deal with an economic plan.
Speaker, on his watch, the deficit is going up by 10%. We have the worst cost of living crisis in a century, and he is in total denial on the National Health Service. The NHS is on the ballot paper in May because it is already at breaking point, and all he offers is 5 more years of crisis. He can't tax the tobacco companies because his lobbyists won't let him. He won't tax expensive properties because his donors won't let him. The British public know you can't trust this Prime Minister on the NHS, and every day he proves them right.
I'll tell him the figures that have come out in the last fortnight: a record fall in unemployment, inflation down to a 6-year low, the IMF saying we're the fastest growing economy of any G7 country. That is what's happening, and what we can see from Labour is failure and weakness, no economic plan, nothing to offer this country. As I put it last week, simply not up to the job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having founded 2 small companies myself and knowing what it's like to employ people, would the Prime Minister commend the small businesses in my constituency who have done so much to reduce unemployment by 31% this year and create 720 apprenticeships?
Well, it's certainly true, as my honourable friend says, that the reduction in unemployment, and we're seeing that now in every region of the country, and some very impressive figures, as she says, a lot of that is coming about because small businesses feel more able to take people on. And part of that is the help that we've given to small businesses, cutting the small business rate of tax, and also, through the national insurance rebate, making sure that every small business benefits by £2,000. That is helping to give them the confidence to give people work.
Sheila Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few months ago, I raised with the Prime Minister the case of my former constituent, Mr. Mohammed Asghar, who was in prison in Pakistan. Since I did that, he's actually been shot in prison by a security guard. His family would like him to be returned to this country under a prisoner transfer agreement. What steps will the Prime Minister take to achieve that?
No, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise this case. It's appalling the way this man has been treated, and it's particularly appalling that, as she says, he was actually shot while in prison, supposedly being protected by the Pakistani authorities. We have raised this case, and I've raised this case personally with the with the leaders of Pakistan. We obviously are looking at the case for a prisoner transfer, but they had to be suspended in recent years because Pakistan released prisoners that we returned to them, so there is a problem there. But we take this case very, very seriously and are raising it at every level in Pakistan.
Maria Miller.
Mr. Speaker, young people in my constituency want to know that they have the security of job opportunities when they leave college. Under Labour, the number of young people who couldn't get onto work went up by a staggering 45%. Will the Prime Minister join me in applauding the companies up and down the country who've taken the opportunity under this government to create apprenticeships, leading to the steepest fall in youth unemployment since records began?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. In her constituency, the youth claimant count is down by over 50%. In terms of apprenticeships, we are on target to achieve 2 million apprentices during this Parliament, which is far better than anything achieved by the previous government. And for the next Parliament, the Conservative Party said we want to achieve 3 million apprenticeships, and we've set out how we'll pay for that by making sure we continue to reform welfare and indeed reduce the benefit cap.
Kelvin Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research by the Medical Research Council has found that over 6,000 babies are born each year with birth defects and irreversible genetic damage caused by alcohol consumed in pregnancy. In Canada, the USA and other countries, all drinks containers must carry warnings about the dangers of birth defects, but our government has so far refused to require the same in Britain. Will the Prime Minister now change the government's policy and show that Britain cares as much about the well-being of its children as do Canadians and Americans?
No, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point, and like many MPs in this House, I've met the organisation most concerned with fetal alcohol syndrome, and indeed the parents of those that have adopted children suffering from defects because of excessive intake of alcohol by their birth parents. I'm very happy to look at all the suggestions he makes, and indeed other suggestions, because this is a growing crisis in our country, and we should do everything we can to stop it.
Mr. Andrew Percy.
Mr. Speaker, it's 10.5 months since the tidal surge hit North Lincolnshire and East Yorkshire. Many of my constituents are still out of their homes. Given the importance of the Humber to the UK economy, inward investment from companies such as Siemens, energy generation, petrochemicals, can I urge the Prime Minister to look favourably, given that we know this will happen again in the next 50 years, on the plan put together by the local authorities and the Environment Agency of massive investment in our defences to make sure we have a 1 in 200 year standard that we really require?
No, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend on his leadership on this issue. He brought a group of members of Parliament to come and see me to brief me about the proposals that could be put in place. I know that he's also been to see the Chancellor of the Exchequer and is working very hard for his constituents on Humberside to make sure we do everything we can. This government has increased spending on flood defences. Many schemes were tested over the last few days with these very high winds and stood up extremely well, and we'll look very carefully at what he says.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before the Scottish referendum, the Prime Minister said, if Scotland says it does want to stay inside the United Kingdom, then all options of devolution are there and all are possible. So will he unequivocally stand by his promise and confirm this, of course, means full fiscal autonomy being on the table, meaning that devolving a full control of Scottish taxes and spending to the Scotland's Parliament to help create jobs and a more just society.
I certainly stand by all the promises I made in the run-up to that referendum campaign, and I think Lord Smith is doing an excellent job at looking at all the options for devolution. I'm sure we can find a way forward, but on the basis of keeping our promises, I hope the SNP will keep their promise when they said that the referendum ended this question for a generation, possibly a lifetime. I'm not sure their former leader's sticking to that, but I think he should.
Mr. David Heath.
Mr. Speaker, I'm personally grateful to the Prime Minister for the many visits he made to Somerset during the flooding crisis earlier this year. But there are, despite a lot of good work, there are two decisions which are outstanding. So can I invite him to come down to Somerset again, before it gets too wet, so that he can announce the sluice on the River Parrett and he can announce a sustainable funding mechanism for the Somerset Rivers Authority?
I would be delighted to return to Somerset. I'm sure many of my colleagues will be beating a path to Somerset as well in the coming months. But I am excited by what has happened in terms of the dredging of the Tone and the Parrett. There are now multiple teams out there. They've made a real difference. I think they're proving that dredging, particularly on man-made waterways, which is what we're dealing with, can make a real difference. My only disappointment is I wasn't allowed to drive the machinery myself for some antiquated health and safety reasons, but I'm sure I will be back.
Chris Evans.
Scam mail costs this country £3.5 billion a year. Brings misery to many elderly and vulnerable people right across this country. It's only reported by 1 in 5 people. It is really the hidden crime in this country. What is the Prime Minister going to do to stamp this out in terms of scams on internet, on the telephone and through the post?
No, I think the Honourable Gentleman makes an important point, which is of concern to many, many people. I think that is the sort of issue which the National Crime Agency is able now to bring together expertise and to combat properly. I think there's also technological advances in terms of spam filters and other filters that people can put on their computers so that they get fewer of these emails in the first place.
Mr. Henry Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join with me in congratulating Varian Medical Systems in my constituency for celebrating 30 years of high-quality manufacturing, and also congratulate Elector Oncology Systems for plans to significantly expand in my constituency? Does it not prove that high-quality UK manufacturing is on the rise?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point, which is that we are seeing a recovery in some of the most important high-skill industries in our country, not least pharmaceuticals, medical services and high-end manufacturing. When we look at the jobs that have been created under this government, some 2/3 of them have come from higher-skilled jobs rather than lower-skilled jobs, and that is all to the good because we want to rebuild the manufacturing base of our country.
Jamie Reid.
Mr. Speaker, my 10-year-old constituent, Maddie Snell, was disappointed with the response she recently received from the Prime Minister regarding the West Cumberland Hospital in England, telling the BBC that he didn't answer her questions. Now, I'm sure members on all sides of the House can relate to Maddie's frustration there. But before the last general election, the Prime Minister promised a bare-knuckled fight to protect maternity services that has never materialised. Will he confirm today that every maternity service unit in every hospital in England is now subject to a national review?
What I want to see is district general hospitals with maternity services within them. And if we look at the West Cumberland Hospital, we have contributed £70 million to the redevelopment of West Cumberland Hospital, together with £11 million community hospital in Cockermouth, which has been opened to provide further services. And unlike in Wales, the amount of money going in to West Cumberland is going up. And that should be enough to provide good maternity services.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, today Jim O'Neill completes his final City Growth Commission report. Will the Prime Minister and Chancellor continue their support for Jim to ensure that a future Conservative government delivers on a northern powerhouse?
I think Jim O'Neill has done an absolutely first-class job with this report, and I'll be seeing him later today, and I want to congratulate him on what he's done. I think there's a real opportunity here, as the Chancellor has spoken about, to create a northern powerhouse by looking at how we can use high-speed rail and other infrastructure to link up our great northern cities so that we really have a proper balance in a rebalancing of our economy. That's what this is about, and I think that Jim O'Neill's work is all to the good.
Frank Roy.
The Prime Minister will aware that Tata Steel intend to sell their long product division to the Claes Group. which could have an effect on 15,000 jobs. Given the significance of British steel industry to the UK economy, and also Clesh's history of asset stripping and dumping companies across Europe, does the Prime Minister agree with me that Clesh is not a fit and proper company to own such an important part of our economy, and that the prospect of such a sale merits a direct intervention by this government in the interest of both steelworkers and the British public?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that I want to see a successful British steel industry as much as he does, and we have seen some good steps in recent years with what's happened at Port Talbot and indeed what happened at Redcar. I think we should talk to Clesh and we should judge them by what they say and by what they do, and we should give every assistance that we can to try and maintain these important businesses and these important jobs. That is exactly what we're doing. We're already looking at all the flexibilities there are under things like the emissions directives to see what more that we can do, and I'm sure that the business department, and I will be looking into this personally, will do everything it can to support this important industry.
Mr. Gareth Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bluewater Shopping Centre in my Dartford constituency recently held its jobs fair with more jobs on offer than there are actually job seekers in Dartford. Will the Prime Minister therefore congratulate Bluewater for this contribution to a 50% fall in unemployment and what can only be described as a jobs revolution in Dartford?
Well, I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in congratulating Bluewater. The fact is, in his constituency, the claimant count is down by 47% since the election, and it is noticeable how many jobs are being created in Dartford and in retail, and I very much congratulate what Bluewater have done. The last time I went, regrettably, it was to make a speech rather than to go shopping, but maybe next time I'll be able to do both.
Nick Dakin.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister rule out any further increases in VAT while he remains in post?
Excellent question.
Our plans don't involve raising taxes on ordinary people. What we want to do is make sure we hold back the growth of public spending so we can go on cutting people's taxes. We've taken 3 million people out of income tax. We've given a tax cut to 26 million people. We cut the tax of every small business in our country. We've set a low rate of corporation tax so business can come and locate in our country. The people who put up taxes are the people who want to put up spending and put up borrowing. That is the Labour Party.
John Barron.
Our nuclear test veterans very much welcomed the Prime Minister's words of recognition at PMQs on the 2nd of July. But given that 1 in 3 of their descendants have been born with a serious medical condition, can he update the House as to progress, as he promised to do then in July, as to the establishment ex gratia payment of of £25 million into a charitable fund to help those veterans and, most importantly, descendants in need?
I'm afraid there's not a lot more I can say to my honourable friend today. We are looking carefully at what we can do. As he said, we have gone further in terms of recognition of this issue than previous governments. What I would say to him is if you look across the board at those grievances that are held by those who've served in our armed forces, I think this government has done a lot to deal with them and deal with them correctly. The first government to say there should be an Arctic Convoy Medal and delivering it. The first government to say there should be a clasp for those who served in Bomber Command. And yesterday it was an enormous privilege to welcome to Downing Street all those who'd served in the South Atlantic in connection with the Falklands War but who hadn't been able to get campaign medals because of the very rapid cut-off date for that campaign. And that's why another 10,000 people who served in the South Atlantic in difficult conditions under this government are getting the medals they deserve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A year ago, the Prime Minister looked a grieving mother in the eye as she begged him to get the British police involved investigating the murder of her son in Greece. He said no. This week at the trial, we've discovered that the forensic evidence is compromised. Can the Prime Minister therefore account as to why he sent police to Thailand to pursue a murder case on Friday and what he will do to finally live up to his promise to help secure justice for Tyrell Matthews Burton?
Well, what I remember is meeting with the Honourable Lady last year, with her constituent, and going through all the things we could try to do to help. And my understanding is that Miss Matthews did secure funding from the Homicide Service for the cost of a legal representative in Greece, and that also covered her travel costs to attend the trial, as well as costs for key witnesses to give evidence at the trial. And I believe the Foreign Office are also working hard to provide consular service support to Miss Matthews. And of course, we will go on helping in any way that we can, and I give her that guarantee today. In terms of the case in Thailand, I think because of the uncertainties over that case and the fact that 2 British citizens were murdered, it is right to offer the Thai government the assistance of British police to go out, particularly to look at some of the technical evidence, and I was very pleased that the Thai Prime Minister agreed that when we were at the Europe-Asia Summit in Milan last Friday. So on all these cases, I'm very happy to help, very happy to hear from the Honourable Lady what more she thinks we can do in the important case that she raises.
Walker.
Since 2009, when under the last government there were more than twice as many young unemployed in Worcester as there were apprenticeships started. The situation has now been turned on its head. The latest figures show that there are almost 3 times as many apprenticeship starts in the city as there are young unemployed. Would the Prime Minister agree that his plan to create 1 million further apprenticeships can help us to eliminate youth unemployment?
My old friend is absolutely right. That is our ambition, is to eliminate youth unemployment by making clear it's no longer an option anymore to leave home, claim housing benefit, sign on JSA when you could have the chance of a job or an apprenticeship or some training. And we're certainly committed to helping in every way we can in Worcester. I know that the Labour frontbench, including the Shadow Business Secretary, doesn't even know where Worcester is and referred to it in a radio interview as Wichita. I think he's been overdoing the country music and he needs to get in touch with his inner Worcester woman.
Sir Andrew Miller.
The Prime Minister will, I'm sure, agree that the regulatory structure around hydraulic fracturing needs to be scientifically robust. With that in mind, can he explain why, in the other place, his party rejected amendments that would do just that?
What I want to see is obviously a robust regulatory and environmental permissions regime, which I believe we have, but I do want us to get on with recovering unconventional gas, because I think the greatest proof of how safe this technology is and how good it could be for jobs and energy costs in our country is to demonstrate some wells where it is actually working. And my fear is that in the other place, and indeed many in this place, want to cover this new industry with regulation so it simply doesn't go ahead.
Sir Nick Harvey.
The Prime Minister will recall that film tax relief existed as a legitimate government tax policy for 10 years from 1997. Is he aware that HMRC are now effectively treating all investors from that period as tax dodgers, even those who produced genuine films and created jobs as intended? Will he instruct Treasury Ministers to review that approach and meet a cross-party delegation of concerned MPs?
Well, I'm sure we've all had constituency and other emails and cases about this, but I have to say every time I ask the Treasury about it, they are very clear that the things that are being investigated are abuses and were known to be abuses at the time when people entered into them. And so I think we do have to be, what I want is low tax rates, but tax rates that people actually pay. And where schemes are being used for avoidance, we should be very, very swift in closing them down.
Steve Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Audit Office blames a lack of coordination across 3 departments for the government's failure to deport hundreds of foreign criminals, many of them highly dangerous. So where does the buck stop? Is it with the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Justice Secretary, or is it with the Prime Minister himself?
The buck absolutely stops with me. I'm very clear about that. I think the National Audit Office has actually produced a very good report into what is a difficult issue that we need to get right. We have deported 22,000 foreign national offenders since I've become Prime Minister. The report is very clear that since 2013, for the first time, we've got a proper cross-government strategy to deal with this. But it also goes into quite a lot of detail about how there are still too many obstacles in the way in terms of human rights legislation that we need to change. Now, this week, what you've seen from the government this week is that we're now able to deport people first, and they can appeal once they've gone back to their country of origin. And we're reducing the number of appeal routes from 17 routes, which were there under Labour, to just 4. So we're making progress. The buck stops with me, but I wouldn't mind a bit of cross-party support for the actions we need to take.
Julian Hopper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in welcoming the fact that the £800 million contract for older people's services in Cambridgeshire was awarded to the NHS bidder, in stark contrast to the £1 billion privatisation of Hinchingbrooke Hospital, tendered by the last government, who didn't even have an NHS bidder in the final 5?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point, which is we want to see an expansion of NHS services, and when the party opposite claims that there's some sort of secret agenda to privatise, that was the case under the last Labour government, where they fattened up contracts and insisted only on private providers. Under this government, the NHS is being properly run by those who are clinicians, and they make decisions about the future of our health service.
Mr. David Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister's opposition, he always lectured this party on transparency. Can I ask him when he's going to shine the light on the men who were jailed and fitted up in 1973 for the National Builders' Strike? Will he release the papers related to that case? And if he won't, what has the Tory party got to hide?
I haven't looked at this case previously, but I'm very happy to take away and look at what he says. What I would say is actually, over recent years, we have shortened the period during which papers remain secret and released more and more papers, and I'm very happy to look at the case he raises.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, I've been recently campaigning a lot in East Northamptonshire with the excellent Conservative candidate for Corby, Tom Pursclough. The number one issue on the doorstep is EU migration. Last year, 214,000 people came to this country from the EU. That is not sustainable. What Prime Minister can be done about that?
Well, I think my honourable friend and the candidate to whom he rightly refers is absolutely right that we need to get a grip of immigration wherever it is coming from. This government has made very big steps forward, closing down 700 bogus colleges, the first time we've had an economic cap on migration from outside the EU, a whole series of rules coming in about benefit claimants, abuse and all of those issues, but I'm convinced there's more that we need to do, because I think the British public are not being unreasonable about this. They want control over it. The Shadow Chancellor keeps shouting out, let us remember who it was who said we needed to send out search parties to find more immigrants. Let us remember who it was who delivered completely uncontrolled immigration. It was the party opposite and the Shadow Chancellor. But on a happier note, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, the whole House will want to unite in this way and congratulate the former clerk, Sir Robert Rogers, on his well-deserved peerage.
Banging on about Europe. Banging on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, British citizens, Mr. and Mrs. Mahmood, have been living in Sierra Leone for the last 5 years. Unsurprisingly, when Ebola spread, they spent their savings coming back to Slough. I have been trying since the beginning of this month to get them some financial support here. And I have failed, despite a promise by the Health Secretary to get a response to me, because they've been rejected on the grounds that they're not habitually resident here. I threatened to raise this in these question time, and as a result, at 11:59 today, I got a reply saying they would get no support from the DWP. What's the Prime Minister going to do about people who are fleeing Ebola to come back to the country of their nationality and have no resources?
Well, I'm very happy to look at the case that she mentions. It must be absolutely terrifying for people who are British citizens, who have a right to come here, who've fled that country because of all the things that are happening. I'm very clear our first responsibility is to help tackle Ebola at source in West Africa, and I think it's fair to say that Britain is doing more than any other country, bar perhaps the United States, in terms of marshalling resources, troops, healthcare professionals, training facilities and beds. But in terms of our own constituents, I'll look very carefully at the decision made at 11:59 today and see what can be done.
Order.